So next we're going to discuss dualism. And this is probably, if you ask most people and kind of push them on it, this is probably the way most people think about our minds. Because we think that we have an I that does the thinking and reasoning and wondering about ourselves, but we also kind of think that this is separate from the body. That the mind kind of controls the body, and so, but they're kind of different sorts of things, and this is what philosophers call dualism. So to get a little bit more precise about it, on this kind of view, the mind is something non-physical and the body is something physical. So dualism has been around a really, really long time, but people often associate it with Descartes. And he was the one who made clear, one of the people who made clear exactly what he meant by this. And so he divided the world into two different kinds of substances: material, physical stuff, and immaterial or non-physical things. Well, and to be clear, this isn't super important for us, but there was also a third kind of substance, and that was the stuff that God is made out of. So God is not immaterial substance like our mind, nor is it a material substance like our body, but God is actually something different. But that's not super important for what we're talking about here. So the big problem, though, that dualism faces is called the interaction problem, and this is the idea that, okay, well, if non-physical minds and physical bodies are really separate kinds of things, then how do they interact with one another? How is it that we can control our body with our mind when mind is non-physical? And if you think about Casper the Friendly Ghost or something like that, or the way that we think of spirits as not being able to affect physical things, more practically, if you think about the fact that we can sort of control our bodies perhaps with our minds, but most people think you can't control other physical stuff with our mind. So we think most of the time that we can't bend spoons with our mind. So that kind of shows you how this interaction problem is articulated. So one attempt to address this problem is the view of phenomenalism. So this is the idea that, okay, mental states are somehow properties that arise from the brain. So mental states are caused by the activity of the brain, but they're still a different kind of property than physical states. So they're not necessarily a different kind of substance, but they are a property that arises out of something physical. So one way you can kind of think of this as something like an orchestra, which is a thing sort of that arises out of the interaction of a bunch of musicians together. So if you get a bunch of musicians together and you have them play a song together, they're an orchestra, but the orchestra isn't really a thing outside of all those people. It's maybe just something you call those people. And so in this sense, mind isn't really something different. It's just something that it's more of a property of the thing. A problem with epiphenomenalism, though, is that mental properties are caused by the brain, but the mental properties can't cause anything themselves. So it's a one-way interaction. You can say that the mental property arises out of the physical properties, but then it doesn't follow from that the mental properties are able to go back down and cause something physical to happen. So it's a one-way interaction in a sense, and that's perhaps a problem for epiphenomenalism. So there's a different view called interactionist property dualism, which says, okay, mental properties arise from the complexity of the brain, but they do have causal powers. But then they just face the same problem that Descartes did. Well, okay, if these mental properties emerge from physical stuff, but they're somehow different than physical stuff, how can they go back and affect the physical stuff? How can they change things in the physical world? And physicalists will say, okay, look, we've looked at the brain, and we can see that neuron X firing affects neuron Y firing, and we can see all this physical stuff going on, but we don't see anything that can't be explained by physical stuff. So we don't see anything extra that the mental could be doing in there. We can see it all happening. We don't have any room for the mental or for some kind of non-physical stuff to be happening in the brain. So the existence of some extra entity, whether you want to call it mind or mental properties or whatever you want to call it, just doesn't really fit with the picture that we have. But despite all this, dualism remains a popular view with a lot of people. And part of this is, again, like we said at the beginning, because this seems to be the way we think about ourselves. We think about ourselves as something above and beyond just our body. We think of ourselves as the body as being connected to us, but we think of ourselves as something different. So you can often people sort of think about this, and dualists think about this in a way as like us sort of watching a movie. Like as you go through the world, it's like you're watching a movie on a screen, and maybe your mind is sort of the projector of this onto your brain is the projector of this, and your mind is watching it somehow. And so this kind of picture, again, seems to fit with sort of our intuitions or our common sense about the way our mind works. Another reason that people are attracted to dualism is because of religion. If you believe in gods or spirits or heaven or any of this kind of thing, then it seems like you have to believe that there is something, mind is something separate from body, and that there is something like spirit or something that can exist without the body. Certainly, with the idea of an afterlife, you have to think that there is something to survive. That if your body is gone, then there's still something left. And so this is one of the big attractions of dualism. And one of Descartes' central arguments for dualism is that he can imagine himself without a body, but not without a mind. So the question is, can we do that? And it seems like we kind of can if you look at things like body switching movies, like I can't remember what they're called right now, but there's a couple of them where somebody will inhabit someone else's body, or even the idea of the people used to have that you could be inhabited by demons or something. This kind of idea wouldn't work on a physicalist picture. It needs a dualist idea in order to get off the ground. And so all of these reasons are reasons why people stick to dualism, even though it has all these problems.